y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to give you some information about my West Highland Way trek, just in case any of y'all have plans to do that in the future. First, the West Highland Way is approximately a 97-mile path that starts in Mulga, which it appears to be spelled Milngavie, northbound up to Fort William. Most people do hike northbound, as I did, but there's no rule or anything saying that you can't go southbound if that's what you prefer. Most of the things you see that are set up or displayed as far as how many miles you have left when you're on the trail are done in a northbound direction. The trail takes you through the Scottish Highlands, by lochs and waterfalls, and just amazing scenery. To get to the start of the trail, we flew from the Atlanta International Airport, had a layover that was pretty short in Amsterdam, and then went into Glasgow, Scotland. And then from there, we took a relatively short Uber ride to Mulga, where we had a lodge for the first night. So for the West Highland Way, you kind of have two options for lodging. You can either pack all of your backpacking gear like you would for a normal trip where you're gonna camp out at night, or you can opt for town hopping. So you can make it more like the Camino, where you're walking from town to town and staying inn to inn. And I suppose you could actually do a mixture of the two if you wanted to, what they call wild camp, and then also some nights stay in an inn so you can get a hot shower and maybe do some shower laundry. I decided for myself, because I knew I was going to be 6 months pregnant at this time, that I wasn't going to lie to myself and say that I wouldn't take every opportunity to stay in town if it was available, but also having the comforts of a bed, a hot shower, a warm meal at night, I knew would be a morale booster. Plus, my OBGYN felt like it was a better plan to not carry a whole lot of weight, so to keep my day pack as light as possible. So that's what we went with, and while I think camping in the Scottish Highlands would have made me, you know, more at one with the area than sleeping in a lodge, I don't have any regrets. But if you are somebody who likes to go on adventures, but you're not really into the camping part in the outdoors, then this would be a fantastic trail for you. It's definitely more of a wild feel to me than, say, the Camino de Santiago, at least the French way was. Because you do go through civilization quite a bit, you don't have to worry about carrying food for the whole span of time that you're going to be out there. Now, I would look ahead, because not every town stop has a market where you could resupply on food if you are going to be wild camping, but still, maybe even just a couple of days of food or something like that. And most of the town stops that you'll be walking through will have some sort of cafe or bar at an inn, so you can get a hot meal and you're not gonna have to rely on all of your food coming from your pack, unless that's just what you want to do. I mean, certainly packing your own food could potentially save you money, you know, compared to eating out, just like staying in a tent is going to save you money versus staying at the lodges. If you do decide to eat out, for breakfast you're going to see a lot the full Scottish breakfast, and it can be mixed up a little bit, but a lot of the staples, you're going to have stuff like sausage, eggs, black pudding, baked beans, cooked potato. I don't know if they do it on a skillet or roasted or whatever, but it's really good. And they usually serve toast and coffee. I will say that I preferred the full Scottish breakfast to the breakfasts that I had in Spain while I was on the Camino. The pastry and coffee only for breakfast is a struggle for me. But having just a really hearty breakfast was good for me to start off the day. Other common dishes that you might see are haggis, steak pie, and fish and chips. And then they have other things too, but those are just like almost every place you go will probably have those options. If you do decide to stay at the lodges and you're gonna go through a longer stretch for a day that won't have an inn where you can stop and eat lunch, the place that you're at is probably going to offer a pack lunch for an additional charge, and we took that option a few times at some of the places that we stayed because we knew we weren't going to walk through an area that would have food, or they were going to have food but they closed at like 2 p.m. serving food, so you couldn't guarantee that you would get there in time for lunch, especially if you walk in slow like I do. If you decide that you do want to lodge in town, you kind of have two different options that you could go with as far as making those plans. You can either, well, I guess really three. You can either plan it all yourself and book in advance, or you can do it on the fly while you're out there on the trail so you have more flexibility. But the only thing scary to me about that is it could be a very busy trail. It didn't seem super busy when we were there, but I would just hate to have the experience of all of the lodging being full and you have no backpacking equipment and now you're in a mess. So I would definitely suggest booking ahead, even though I know that puts limitations on, like, you've got to be to X point at the end of the day each day, instead of having the flexibility that wild camping would offer. But the other option is, instead of booking yourself, you can book with a travel company. And that's what we decided to do because I didn't want the hassle of all the logistics, and I knew that we were already on a limited time frame anyway. We were going to be in Scotland for 2 weeks, and we wanted a couple of days to explore when we got done and, you know, see some bonus stuff. So we booked with a company called Max Adventure, and I feel like everything went very smoothly with them. They were easy to work with. They got everything booked and together for us and said, here's your plan. Unfortunately, I made a mistake. We booked their 9-day, 8-night trek, and I assumed that meant we would have 9 days to do the 96 to 97 miles, which would mean there was an average of like 10 to 11 miles per day. But actually, day one counts as the day that you get in. So we only had actually 8 days of hiking, which made that average go up to like 12 to 13 miles per day. And we ended up with one day that was like 7 miles, and 2 15-mile days, 1 14-mile day. So it was not as enjoyable as it would have been if I had paid attention to that and spread the actual walking out over 9 to really even 10 days. So when I booked with Max Adventure, and I assume that other companies are probably similar, they asked us, you know, what level of luxury are you looking for when you're staying at the inns? And they had like a budget route, they had, you know, mid-grade, and then like luxury. And so we went with mid-grade because, you know, right in the middle seemed like it would be nice. And everywhere we stayed was definitely nice. Don't really have any complaints about anything. There was one place that like their plumbing was out and we had to go to like the main house and take a shower, but we still got a shower, right? So you're gonna have little hiccups here and there, but Max did book us with places that were, you know, in that mid-grade, and everywhere was pleasant for sure. Most of the inns that we stayed at, breakfast was also included, so that was nice. And they also arranged to have all of our luggage transferred through a third-party luggage transfer company. You just had to have your bags to the drop-off pickup spot by a certain time each morning, and then it would magically be wherever you were going in the evening. I will say, unfortunately, the luggage company ended up breaking my suitcase. They said that it was slightly over their limit on weight, but they were willing to compensate us for part of what it would cost to get a new bag. So I felt like that was a pretty legitimate offer, considering I was slightly over the weight limit. And, you know, they were like, we don't know what happened to it. Our drivers would tell us if they tore something up, but it wasn't torn up that morning, and then it was in the evening. But they made it right, and so 2 thumbs up for that. So the total for all of this with Max Adventure for dealing with the logistics, the mid-grade inns that offered breakfast, the luggage transfer for 2 different people for 9 days, 8 nights came out to $3,160. Now, I know that that is no small amount of money, but I will say it can be done with a travel company for cheaper and also, you know, more expensive, again, if you want that luxury. But if you wanted to do something like a mixture of wild camping and occasional lodging, and most of the time, like getting your food from a market, you could do this trip for a much lower budget than $3,000. For navigation, we use the Far Out app. It's got the track in there, different waypoints at all the town stops, so it'll tell you about markets or restaurants and things like that. But not only do you have the information that is entered through the Far Out app, but comments on waypoints from different hikers that give you more information. So it's really useful not only for navigating when you're on the trail, but also just for planning purposes. Most of the time I had cellular service while I was out on the West Highland Way, but there were a couple of days at the end that it got spotty in different areas. And then I actually went through a international outage through Verizon, so I didn't have any cell reception for like 2 days, so I couldn't be sure about those days. But if you had some other navigation app that is free and, you know, only works if you have cell service, you're gonna probably be fine. The West Highland Way is very well marked, but I do think that Far Out has a lot to work with as far as planning purposes. Now let's talk about water. There is a plethora of water on the West Highland Way. There are natural sources everywhere. When you're going into different towns, of course, there are places that you can stop and fill up there, spigots outside the buildings. And the first couple of days we kept seeing this Scotland water, these little dispensers, and some of them, or at least I know one of them, works by motion, because I thought I had to push a button and it scared the mess out of me when it started dispensing without me touching anything. We had our Sawyer squeezes with us, and we did use them one day just for the sake of using it because we were carrying it. But I really preferred to just get my water while I was in town because of all of the farming and the sheep, and, you know, I don't know what pesticides are being used and whatever. So with the capacity of 2 liters, you should probably be good to get you to the next town stop, but it doesn't hurt to have some sort of water treatment, whether that's filtration, you know, chemical treatment of drops, etc., just in case. I will say though, if you're going to use a filter, specifically the Sawyer Squeeze, make sure you have a water bottle or some sort of water bladder that is compatible with the threads on the Sawyer Squeeze already with you, because I ran into a guy who was from Canada. He was wild camping and he brought a Sawyer Squeeze, intended to get a bottle from just the grocery store when he got there, and nothing that he found would work with the threads of the Sawyer Squeeze. So thankfully, because we were staying in town and I really only used about 1 liter most of the time, I was able to give him one of my Smart Water bottles, and that, you know, made his life much easier, because with wild camping, you don't want to have to like go farther and run into a town and then come back, you know, and not being able to use his Sawyer, he could only carry, you know, what he had on him. So I assume his pack was heavy, carrying more water. But yeah, there's water for days. So as long as you have a filter, you really don't have to carry a whole lot at all. So as far as gear goes in general, again, if you're gonna be backpacking, I would take everything that you normally would for a regular backpacking trip. If you're going to be going lodge to lodge, then everything that you would take for a day hiking trip. You know, make sure you've got the 10 essentials in there just in case you need them. But I do want to talk about some specific things that might be good to tailor for Scotland specifically, or just that stand out to me that I'm glad that I had. And I will include a full gear list on Ladder Pack in the video description, so there will be a link to that if you want to see everything. But definitely make sure you have a Type G adapter if you don't already live in Scotland, because for charging your electronics and things like that, if you live here in the US or if you live in other countries that don't use the G type, that's what you're going to need to be able to charge your electronics. Next, I would recommend having a buff or some kind of eye mask because it stays light for so long. I'd go to bed at like 10 o'clock at night and it would still be pretty light outside. I'd wake up at like 3 in the morning to go pee and it would still be pretty light outside. So especially if you're going to be in a tent, I would have something you can cover your eyes with. But even if you're staying in a room, because the rooms don't have air conditioner, they have a furnace, so sometimes it's still too warm in there and you want to have the windows open and the curtains so the cool air can actually come in, but it also therefore lets the light in. Layers. It fluctuated wildly each day, sometimes like during the day on each day. It might be warm and sunny and then cold and rainy. So having different layers, I had like a sun hoodie, a mid layer, my Cinchi Designs little hoodie, and then I actually carried my puffy coat also in my pack liner so that it would be waterproofed. And then I had a rain jacket and rain pants, and I wore leggings, but you know, you could do shorts and rain pants probably if you wanted to, if you're doing this in the prime of the summer like I did. As far as rain gear goes, I normally opt for the most lightweight thing that I can, and given if I was carrying all of my backpacking gear on this trek, I probably would have done the same thing. But because I knew I was just going to be carrying like a day pack, not a lot of stuff in it, I opted for a heavier weight rain jacket. I went with the Patagonia Torrent Shell, and I'm not upset that I did. It weighs between 12 and 13 ounces. It's got an adjustable hood and pit zips, so you can kind of control how much heat you're keeping in or letting out. I definitely do not regret my decision to take a heavier weight rain jacket because we did get some cold rain, especially on the last day of our hike, but also when we went and summited Ben Nevis. Finally, to me on this trail, an umbrella is a must. Because it rains so much in Scotland, having the ability to pop open your umbrella and just like have some sanity for a second sitting on a rock and not getting rained on and eat a snack, it's really nice to have that. Now, unfortunately, on our last day, it was way too windy to deploy the umbrella, but I don't regret having it at other times, like the second day, I think, when it rained on us and we used our umbrellas. And then also on Ben Nevis, it was really nice because there were so many people out there. To be able to have an umbrella to hide behind to pee was fantastic. Some of the animals to look for out on this trail, if that's something you get into, I definitely do, is the Highland cows, the red deer, which we saw multiple of, and they were not easily spooked by folks, it seemed like. The red squirrel, unfortunately, we did not see any of these. We didn't see a single squirrel the whole time that we were in Scotland. The golden eagle, which I also don't think that we saw. If we did, we weren't able to be like, oh, there's the golden eagle. And finally, the haggis. We totally got had with the haggis. I guess it's like the equivalent of like snipe hunting here, or the jackalope that I heard about while I was living out in Colorado and in the Wyoming area a lot. It's just a fictitious creature that is like a running joke. But if you eat haggis, you're actually eating like leftover sheep parts, just so you know, but it is pretty tasty. And while we're on the topic of critters, I want to talk about the midges. I had probably more comments about when I mentioned going to the West Highland Way, be careful for the midges. The midges are going to destroy you, you know. But I have to say that the only time I've ever been told you might want to carry a bug net, and I did and like actually used it or ever desired one, was on the West Highland Way. Given I only put it on twice the entire time I was out there, because if you stay on the move, they kind of seem to just leave you alone. It's when you stop and they're out. So, I mean, I feel like we got lucky because they really only pestered us twice. Once I was trying to get a shot of a waterfall and they would just not leave me alone long enough to not make it miserable. And then the second time is when we stopped to eat lunch. At first they weren't out, but then they appeared. So just to sit and have a longer break, you know, we put our bug nets on. The best thing I can say is, far as the rest of your body goes and protecting from the midges, I would wear long sleeve shirts and long pants because then they can't get to you. The bug spray that everybody talks about there, Smidge, I really didn't find that it worked very long. Maybe just like when there was a fresh application, but other than that, I just was not super impressed with it and found that, again, the best practice was just covering my skin up. But it's like the weirdest thing. You can stop somewhere and you start noticing, you know, there are midges, so you start moving, and then like they won't be around, but a few minutes later you'll finally feel them stinging you on your scalp. It's like they land on your hair and then it takes them a while to swim to your scalp and then, you know, start tearing you up. But they leave these little red dots, or at least on me they did. Before we went out there, I thought, okay, these must be kind of like mosquitoes, but really they're like the gnats that you see here, or no-see-ums, but you can actually see them kind of floating around like you would a gnat. So anyway, we got pretty lucky with them. They weren't like detrimental. I assume if you're camping, you're going to deal with them more than what we did, but they are out during the day sometimes. So not just in the early morning and late evening like I was told originally. And finally, I want to talk about some bonus adventures, because I feel like if you're not from Scotland and you get all the way there, you should go explore and do some things. So first of all, Ben Nevis is like a 5 to 10 minute drive to the base of it from Fort William, which is where you will finish the trail if you go the typical direction of northbound. So we decided, why not climb Ben Nevis? It is over 4,000 feet. It's the highest point in Scotland and the UK, and most likely you won't get a good view from the top, but it is a well-maintained trail and just a peak that I felt like I had to bag while I was there. Also, Fort William is about an hour and a half, hour and 20 minutes from Loch Ness. So if you get into the hunt for Nessie at all, then you might want to go there. That's something that I've always wanted to go do and see since I was a little kid, is go out there and try to find Nessie, or hope that, you know, she shows up for me. And we actually got to go out on like a little boat tour and go out on Loch Ness and then put our feet in the water and just kind of enjoy the area, a little museum that they had. So the full Loch Ness Monster experience. Then there's Glencoe, which is within, I think, 30 minutes or so of Fort William, and specifically went to Glencoe so we could visit the Hagrid's hut site. Of course, the hut is no longer there, but you can see the site where it was, where the Forbidden Forest, you know, edge is. And so it was just really cool to be there and see that, watching Harry Potter for, you know, multiple times over the years. There are other Harry Potter things that you can do in Scotland. Unfortunately, I did not find out about those until I was on the plane and leaving. And then apparently there are some Game of Thrones sites that you can go visit. But there just wasn't enough time for everything. But if you get into the movie stuff or, you know, show stuff, then you should know about that. There are also some castles that I feel like are worth going to see. We toured one in Stirling. We wanted to tour the one in Edinburgh, but unfortunately it was booked up for days in advance. So if you want to see that one, then make sure you look into that ahead of time. And finally, right there in Fort William where you finish, there's this, I guess, cool little shipwreck, if you will, right there in the town. And you can get a good view of Ben Nevis in the background as long as it's not like a crazy cloudy day. And I'd be doing a huge injustice not to mention the B&B that we stayed at our last day in Fort William. And we actually stayed there to do the bonus day of climbing Ben Nevis and going to Loch Ness. So we stayed there 3 nights total. I can't pronounce the name of the place. I don't want to slaughter it, but I will put the information up for you. And there was a lady there named Lorna that was the innkeeper, and she was just probably the nicest person that we met our entire trip there. I would highly recommend staying at this place. She does breakfast in the morning. It was probably the best breakfast I had while we were in Scotland, and the whole experience was just a great grand finale to our whole trip. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you on information on the West Highland Way and some other additional things. If you've got any questions that you feel like left out some information you need to know to plan your trek, feel free to put that in the comments below, and I'll be happy to share with you what I know, or I'm sure some locals in Scotland would be happy to do so. Thank y'all so much for watching, and if you didn't get to catch the West Highland Way videos, I will link to that playlist in the video description, and we will see y'all next time.